So today I'm working on a Philips Hue dimmer switch, and the problem with this is these buttons here are getting a little flaky. Um, you can tell by sometimes the light won't come on when you press the button, it won't respond. Now this is actually a working one. I just wanted to show you what it looked like before I took it apart, but here's the part numbers and the model. Now basically what's in here is just a circuit board and a battery, and you split the case. It's just a clamshell case. You just have to get a spudger tool in. There's 2 screws in the battery box that you take out the battery, and you can start pulling the case apart. I actually have the case apart here, and you can see the 2 screws inside the battery box that just come out, and you're gonna pop it out. I've broken a few of these tabs. They're very brittle, so the ones that are mostly important are the ones up the top, because the screws hold the bottom side and these tabs hold the top. So the side ones aren't very, it'll work without it. I've had this open and closed a few times. I have attempted to try and clean the buttons with alcohol and some deoxit, but that did not help. And what's inside it is basically this right here. It's a circuit board here with 4 buttons on it. Let's see if I can get a little bit of a focus here. And these are, judging by the size of my fingernail, they're very small. So if you do decide to service these, you're going to need some small tools to do this because it's a pain in the butt. Let's see, on the back side here, I have lost there's supposed to be a cap here. I don't know. I think when I was cleaning with alcohol, it got into the tape that was holding it down. So I'm going to have to come up with something to make that work again, but that's not a big deal. That's just the setup and binding to the bridge. So yeah, I don't know what happened, but I think these things just got I think they're silver plated buttons, and I think they've gotten tarnished inside. I've already tried to work on one, and it was a little tricky, so I thought I would show you what the process was like. I know I can just probably try and source some buttons that I can replace this with, but what fun is that? Plus, I don't know, they're kind of odd. I'm sure they, I could probably buy some from China or something, but yeah, I don't know if I want to order anything from China right now. With that whole coronavirus thing. But I don't think that they would live on the surface for long enough. I just don't want to wait. I want this working. So without any more delay, let's see if we can get into this thing. It would probably be easier to take the switch off to service these, but these things are so small that parts just fly off. So I'm going to keep the base of the switch intact, and I'm just going to try and remove the top plate that is holding the button and the diaphragm in here. It's a little tricky, but I'm going to show you what it's like. So without a microscope or anything, it's going to be a little tough to do this kind of work because these things are so tiny, and it's a little bit of a pain. You really need a small tip to get in here. Now what we have here is 4 contact points, or four points that are actually part of the switch that send the signal to the microprocessor or microcontroller. 2 of these contacts are actually tied across to the other, so there's only one switch contact. When you press this down, it bridges these 2 contacts across to these 2 contacts, or vice versa, I'm not sure. But what we're interested in is taking this here. This is soldered. This cover here is soldered to the board, and it's very tricky to get in here. And these 2 sides here are folded underneath the base of the switch. So that is also tricky, but we're going to go for it. Let's see. I'm going to put a little bit of flux on here. And since these caps are actually made of silver, the solder likes to stick to them. So I'm just going to hit this a little bit first with solder so I can get some fresh solder on here. And I'm going to put the flat side of this tip against the bottom here, because I don't want the solder to try and migrate up this switch here. Like, see how that migrates up? And what I'll do is get some fresh solder wick and press up against it like that. Kind of wiggle it in. And it still looks soldered. And it's going to get to a point where we're going to have to mechanically try and move this out of the way to break this from the board. If you put too much heat on here, you can melt the plastic base, so you got to be, it's a fine balance. Okay, that might be enough. And what I'm going to do is lever up here a little bit. Yeah, it's a little tricky. Might have to get a little bit more solder wick in here. Just takes a lot of patience. Definitely don't want to attempt this after having a cup of coffee, that's for sure. I'm going to try and get an X-Acto knife under here and just try and lever this up a little bit as I'm heating it. Yep, there it goes. See how it's now moving. So I'm going to do the same thing to the other side. Maybe I'll try a different attempt here. Maybe I'll just try heating it without adding much and see if it'll come free. Okay, that worked out too. So the solder wick might not be as necessary. Now here becomes the tricky part. Trying to get these unfolded from the edge here, because there's a tab that goes underneath the switch. So what I found is taking a very fine X-Acto knife and putting your nail on the switch, because this thing could fly off at any moment and go off into Never Never Land and never find it again. Now you may think that, it's scraping a little bit off the board there, so no big deal, just a ground plane. You may think that just by doing that you've released it, but no, there's a longer tab underneath this, which is a pain. So you might need something else to get in there and pull it out even more. Let's see, what do I have here? And that might be enough for now. I'll work on the other side. It'll get to a point where we can pull it off and straighten them out before we put it back down. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to gently pry underneath the switch here without the sharp side being exposed. And there we go, it popped off. So here, where it's going to be delicate, not to lose anything, find my tweezers, remove this plate, and you can see well, let's get this out of the way. You can see the longer tab here. We'll have to flatten that out a bit before we put it back in. But we'll get to the problem here. Take the button off. Don't want to lose you. Oh, you're running away on me. And the diaphragm and insulator. Now this is where the problem is going to be. Now you see where I've tried to get alcohol has not migrated in and under the switch. That's why it wasn't working, because this is pretty well sealed. So it made it that far, but it didn't get underneath the switch. It only migrated in between the this insulator and the diaphragm. So I'm going to try and take the diaphragm up. Oh, I want to try and get this out in one piece, but it's not always going to work. I want to be very gentle not to rip this or lose it. Okay. And let's take the diaphragm up. See if we can find the issue. Well, it looks like it may have tried to get in there. Okay, a little bit of it made it in there. I don't know if you can quite see that, but there are some bubbles here where the alcohol or contact cleaner has got in here, but it's nowhere near where it should be. You can see the dirt or the tarnish on these contacts. So that's the issue with this. Now what I'm going to do is set this beside this. And get some alcohol on a Q-tip. And clean this out. That looks much better. Now this here is going to be a little bit trickier because it's going to want to stick to it. So I'm just twisting it on the board here so it doesn't run away. You can actually see a little witness mark where the tarnish was. Might be a little bit of wear from repetitive use. Okay, so now I'm going to take the tweezers here and try and get this back in place. Get that insulator back on top. I left the alcohol on there so it's kind of sticking to it, so once it gets in place it won't move on me. There we go. Okay, so now I'm just going to take this cap here. Well, first I got to take the button and put that in place. It's so small you could lose this thing so easy. Set it on top. And let's get the cover piece. And this is probably the trickiest part of the whole operation. Now getting these tabs to fold under the board is the tricky part. So what I like to do here is just put my fingernail on one side so it rises up on the other side. And try and shove this back in. And then press it down. I dented it a little bit, so don't press too hard. And same thing with this side. It already sounds a little bit better. And I'm just going to try and clamp this a little bit, my tweezers. Got to make sure that plate sits flat down. If it doesn't, it's not going to work right. Okay, now I think it's time to solder those tabs back in. And this is also a little slightly bit tricky. And I'm trying to use very, very, very little flux because I don't want this to migrate into the switch somehow. I'm just going to put a little on the flat. That's it. And I'm going to just go and touch it. Let it try and solder itself. Okay, good. Try the other side. Good, it's not moving. And the button appears to be, I can hear it clicking. So that's good. So now we just have to hook this up to my little power supply, set to 3 volts, and see if it works. So that now that I have it hooked up to my power supply, I'm just going to do one thing real quick before I test it. Is I'm going to clean up some of the flux with some alcohol. All right, ready for a test. I'm going to turn the power supply on, and if it works, these LEDs up here in the corner will flicker. So let's press it and see what happens. If you can see that, but it's flickering now. So that indeed does work. Excellent. So if you have one of those Philips Hue switches and it's the buttons aren't working and you have some soldering skills, you can fix the little micro switches, little tactile switches yourself, or you can buy new ones. But this was the cheap and free way, and that's it. I hope you guys liked this video, and we'll see you in the next one.